You're listening to The Simplified CEO, the podcast that shows you business does not have to be complicated. So grab a coffee, get comfy, and let's show you how you can get success in every area of your life the simpler way. Just before we jump into today's episode, I have to give today's sponsor a shout out. Now, you know, here on Simplified CEO, we are all about the simple life in business. And I know one of the main areas every entrepreneur wishes was simpler was the bookkeeping. Well, it can be with today's sponsor, Xero. This is an accounting software I have used for years, and honestly, it's made it so easy for me to keep a track of everything. It automates manual tasks, meaning I'm not losing hours to admin, and it can be done from anywhere using their fantastic mobile app. So if you're looking for a simpler way to keep on top of your bookkeeping, go and check out Xero today using the link in the show notes below for a special offer. Now let's get back to today's episode. Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode. Today I am joined by Jenna Farmer, PR extraordinaire. She is going to tell us all the secrets about how you get that PR and media for your business and also what that actually means. But first of all, Jenna, welcome to the show. Do you want to let us know a bit more about you and how you got to be where you are in business today?
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenna. So I'm a PR and I help people get into the media. So my journey into PR was a little bit of a roller coaster one. So around 12 years ago now, I was working abroad in China where I was living and working as a teacher. And I was suddenly really unwell and I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And what I started to do was try and get my head around the condition and like living abroad. So I created my own blog and sort of forged a bit of a community. And then when I came back home to England a few years later, my blog was sort of my entry point to the media. So, you know, it was starting to get read and I had some things go viral, and that meant that I was picked up in the media. And that allowed me to sort of leave my job in teaching and sort of work in the media full time, like write for lots of different publications. And after many years of people asking me, like, how did you do that? Like, how did you tell your story and sort of get known as the person to talk about chronic illness and being gluten free and all of those other things? I started to do PR where I helped other businesses do what I did for myself, really, like become that person online, become the person that's writing those stories, that's being part of the conversation and navigating it.
Amazing. So it wasn't like a career path for you. It's something that you almost stumbled upon and learned the skills organically to for yourself before now you can support other businesses with it.
Yeah, and I have obviously having that journalist background, it's a different angle to some PRs. Obviously, some PRs have the route of being, you know, trained, having a degree in PR. For me, the sorts of PR that I'm really passionate about is helping people tell really great stories and create really
Mm.
great stories. So I always am really honest and passionate about, you know, that's how I transitioned, and especially as somebody that, you know, if we're honest, like the media is really a really middle class industry. It's got obviously a little bit better, but you know, back then it sounds ridiculous, but like being in Birmingham, it just felt like a real big lifetime away. You know, everything was very London centric, was very middle class, like who you knew, or being able to, you know, spend so much money on internships. And I just didn't have any, you know, access to any of that. So I really didn't know like a single person in the industry. I didn't have any internships. I didn't have any connections really. And I wasn't based in London. So obviously that made it a little bit harder. But so I'm also really passionate about, you know, I did it for myself with little connections and showing people that as long as you have a great story, yes, of course, there are still, you know, barriers around it, but you absolutely can get yourself in the media and become that person.
Yeah, I love that. And talking about story, it really is all about that, isn't it? Because when
Yeah.
you're wanting to build brand awareness and become an authority in your space, people, even more so now than ever, want to get to know you, the person behind the brand. And that is why the story is so important.
Yeah.
Sharing a bit of an insight and getting people to know what's behind the business.
Yeah, and I think even, you know, sometimes people will say to me like, "Well, I'm a product business, so how does it work for that?" Because, you know, I just want to send my book to a journalist and then get it featured. But I actually think that it's exactly the same sort of thing, really. You know, being able to tell your story, people want to connect with you. So I think even if you aren't a service business, it's just the same for a product business because people really want to know the story behind a brand. And we see that all
Mm.
the time with like social media marketing as well. But it's not just about the specific product. And even if you're a service business, like you're a mental health expert or a health expert, it might be tempting to just focus on the expert stuff, tips on healthy eating, tips on mental health. But when you tell those like bigger pieces also about, something that's happened in your life, I find those are the sorts of pieces that can really like change your business, grow an audience, and really, speak to the right people.
Yeah, because it is all about learning whether that's somebody that you want to work with. And I think going back to what you just said about products, I 100% agree. If I'm buying into something, I want to know the story behind
Mm.
it. And that's what makes me then fall in love with that as a brand and want to support them. So it's so important to share your story. And with you, you've built a business around your story. And that I think that's amazing, but it goes to show that you don't need to have a huge following or audience or, loads of expertise and experience in your profession before you can start getting the press and media. You can get that at any stage of the business, can't you? If you put the feelers out there and
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about this time last year that I actually did a masterclass, and it was called something like "How I Got Someone in Forbes with Less than 200 Followers," because I think that there is such a myth around needing so many Instagram followers or like how far established you are in business. I've had some business owners work with me literally brand new to business, and I love that because it's a great time to get PR when something's new, but then, you're instilling it right from the beginning. And a lot of people feel like they're just not big enough or successful enough. But, it really couldn't be further from the truth, I don't think.
yeah. Again, it just comes down to the negative connotations and stories that we tell ourselves
Yeah.
about, these limits that we put on ourselves. No one else is doing that. And that's an absolutely amazing example that someone was in Forbes, which people put on such a pedestal,
Yeah.
but they had less than 200 followers.
And I think we put so many things on a pedestal. Like if we take something like Forbes, it's just one publication. But when I speak to so many business owners, it's the one that they ask about. But they just assume there's like a hierarchy. So I've had people get in Forbes that have worked with me one to one, but I've also had people get in Forbes that are in my like £35 membership. Like there's no, it's not that you have to have like an in with somebody. It's not that you only can work with an agency one to one. It's about the same thing that you said. If you've got the story that they're working on, that's the only thing that happened, the
Yeah.
only thing that matters. Sorry. So that is why we need to remove some of those boundaries about, not successful enough, not big enough, not knowing people. And I always say, like, people that say, I could never just be in Forbes. If you stop this episode now and spent 10 minutes, you would probably find a writer for Forbes. It's not that hard. They're really active on Twitter, for example. They're online. It's easier than you think to make these connections, but we just put blocks in the way because we just feel like we're not ready for it.
Yeah, 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 exactly. And this is something I talk about quite a lot. And you can give me your, expertise from the industry, but I genuinely believe that there isn't really no bad press is bad press. And in the beginning, when you're trying to build those relationships and get, some PR coverage for your business, helping them on a story that doesn't necessarily relate in any way to your business is still really beneficial to you because you're building that connection with the journalist then that later on if they
Yeah.
have something that does connect with the business they can come back to you on. So do you agree that it's just about getting yourself in the media to start with and then tailoring it more as you go on?
I think I agree and I disagree. So I agree with the idea, like you said, that the more open minded you can be about PR, and there's so many benefits to PR, it's not just a direct piece of coverage translating to X number of sales. We
Hmm.
know that like there's trust tags. We know that when we get links from websites, that's really going to help our SEO and Google, even if it's just a small mention or if it's not related. And like you say, building those relationships are really key. So even if it's something that, isn't like completely aligned, but you feel like it's a really good publication and it's a really good journalist, then it absolutely makes sense to keep an open mind and also to experiment like what sort of things convert well for you. You might be
Mm.
surprised that, a story that isn't directly related to your business leads to more followers than a story that is. So I would definitely encourage that. At the same time, I think it's okay to have a strategy about the sorts of conversations you want to be telling. So, I saw someone talk about this a few months ago on social media. It was someone in the ADHD space, and they'd be reported about the ADHD space, and the representation of that person and the ADHD space was quite negative, and they were like, "Oh, all PR is good PR," and I was like, "Actually, I don't think that has given anyone any value, really. I don't."
Yeah.
So I think it's okay to be strategic. It's also okay to say, "I don't want to talk about these topics." I think it's okay. Clients say no to me all the time, and I think it is okay. Just like anything else in business, it's like, there's so many things we probably should say less yes to, but we're actually like, no, this doesn't feel right. No, this isn't right for me. And I think it's okay to do that as well. It's just getting the balance right. If it's something that's not going to take you very long and it's something that you just want to give a go, that's great. But at the same time, don't feel like you have to talk about things you're not comfortable with, talk about things that are, precious to you. You don't have to have your children photographed. You don't have to tell dramatic stories. You don't have to relive something that's uncomfortable. And you don't have to, talk about something where you're thinking, oh, I've got red flag, I've got red flag, because you want to feel really confident about the coverage. There's no point getting the coverage and then you're a bit embarrassed to share it because of the direction it's taken. So I think and it gets easier, but just having a balance of those two things in your head can really help, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And hitting back then to that example that you just gave, I think this is one of the biggest fears for people around press is that they will be misquoted or that it will be twisted what they've
Yeah.
said. So, can we talk a little bit about that? Because I think that is a big fear for people. So, what do you recommend about making sure that doesn't happen?
I mean, it is a big fear. It happens less than you think, but it is a big fear. And I think the way that we can tackle it is twofold. I think you can absolutely have control in what is published, and you can ask for something called a read back, which is when you just read it back. Now, there's certain situations that would be useful for. So if you're telling a personal story, like absolutely ask the journalist. And sometimes I'll ask that before we sort of agree, like, can we have a read back? Can we see where the story's going? We just did that the other day, actually. And most journalists are like, absolutely, of course, because, being a previous journalist myself, I know that most aren't out to get you. Most are really just trying to tell great stories. But of course, they get lumped in with, journalists and publications that aren't. But if you're telling something that is a personal story, absolutely, before you sort of have the conversation with the journalist, whether that's email or phone, just say, can I have a read back? A read back is to make sure that you're comfortable and confident. It's not so you can put words in the journalist's mouth, but it's so you can make sure that you're really happy with what is written. If you've done something like an expert quote, for example, where you're saying like drink more water, you wouldn't really ask for a read back in that situation because it's difficult to see how that would be interpreted. But I think explain this to the journalist. If there's a sometimes I think that if you do an interview via email, that gives you a bit more control because obviously you're sending the words as opposed to having a conversation on the phone. But if you
Mm,
do have a conversation on the phone, which lots of journalists prefer, just ask them, can you check it? Can I have a read back beforehand? I think understand the things that are sort of out of the journalist's control. So one of the obvious ones is the headline. So the headline can be changed. The quotes that you've said, not so much, but the headlines can be changed. So bear that in mind because sometimes it's also outside of that journalist's control as well. The editor can create the headline. So bear that in mind. But yeah, just building those relationships with journalists, explaining how you're feeling if it is a sensitive topic, asking for a read back before it goes to print. Those can all really help you, I think, to make sure that you're represented properly.
mm. So, one of the things that I found, the stories that I told myself about press back in the beginning when I was first starting to step into this space, again, I'd sort of put journalists in this like bubble that they were fierce and like, I don't know, just not
Yeah,
nice people, I suppose. And actually, it couldn't be further from the truth. The journalists I've met, they're just exactly the same as you and me. They're just normal people. And we put the whole of the press in this sort of space, don't we, that has a lot of negativity around it. And actually, in the day to day, that's just not true at all, is it? And most journalists that I've dealt with are actually freelance, so they're not tied to any publication.
yeah.
And I think that can sometimes help as well, make you feel a bit more
Yeah,
comfortable.
and freelance journalists are great because they need stories constantly. So obviously, if you're at if you have a role, like a staff role in a newspaper or magazine, you also need stories. But obviously, the freelance journalists need to come up with them constantly. They're not having an editor say to them, "Can you write about this?"
Yeah.
Usually, they have to come up with the idea. So they really work with the person, and they really, helps shape the story. And as you say, they write for lots of different publications. So then, you might say to them, well, actually, I don't feel like this one would work for me. Because that's another thing. Of course, there is certain publications you can say no. Like a lot of my clients will say, I don't want to be here, I don't want to be there. And that is okay as well. I think, like you say, sometimes we just group journalism all together. So, of course, there are publications that absolutely, you know, make things more difficult in life with the things they print. And, having, for example, I have a client that was in the autism and ADHD space, and having an autistic child, at times I would be so stressed because part of my job would then literally be correcting other stories. They'd be like commenting on
Yeah.
stories that had been published and was like, here's how it's wrong. And I was like, this is so frustrating. But at the same time, PR literally gives you a voice to change that. So when the stories was all a few months ago about ADHD not being a real condition, which was somebody that had said, I forget his name, um, that is so frustrating. But then what an absolute joy that I could, use my clients and say, right, we're going to change the narrative about this. We're going to have a conversation about this, reach out to all the newspapers and give them some quotes on why, the literal atomical brain and all of those sorts of things show us that ADHD is, of course, real. So it can be really frustrating when you're seeing stories presented negatively, when you've got an emotional attachment like I have around autism because my son's autistic. But then I've used my voice to correct that and challenge that. And, what other platform than the media gives you that? So I absolutely love that side of things.
Yeah.
If you're seeing things that are frustrating you in the media around your topic, you absolutely can pitch an idea around that and try and change the conversation. And also, I think the media is such a general term, but there's so many different publications. Again, you might just want to focus on like women's lifestyle magazines or business magazines, and we need to just break them up into different parts. And as you say, I remember many years ago when I was pregnant, so it must have been about 7 years ago now. My nan and granddad was going to be split up into separate care homes, and I was still a journalist then, and I just reached out to every journalist. I was like, who could help me cover this story? Obviously, I want my nan and granddad to stay together. Unfortunately, they passed away now, but um, the Daily Mail actually led the charge on it, and I was absolutely terrified. But they actually were absolutely brilliant, and they were so sensitive with how they dealt with it. They gave me read back after read back. They offered corrections. Um, and whatever you say about that publication, which does have many faults, they put the pressure on the council and kept my nan and granddad together. And I think whatever you think about various publications, the power that they have to literally make change is insane. And sometimes that change is bad. And I totally get that. But sometimes the change is really good. So I think you have to bear that in mind. If you've got a message that you want to share, I can't think of another platform that literally could put pressure in that case, on a whole council than the media could. Just my thoughts on it.
Yeah. And as you were talking, the word literally going around my head was power. It
Yeah.
gives you power and it gives you your voice to share with the world. So I 100% agree. Now, that is a really lovely story and way that you've utilized the power of PR for good with your grandparents. Has there been a time in your business that it's been a real struggle, something that you've had to really overcome in your business journey and the lesson that you learned from it?
So yeah, a few years ago, so it would have been, yeah, about 2 years ago now, my son started school. So just under 2 years ago, because he's in year one now. And he had a really bad start to school. He went to a school that was just not, I don't really know what happened really, but just not neurodivergent friendly at all. And so by the time we got to October, he was in school like 1 hour a day because he was just not happy in school. I didn't recognize him. He was so stressed. So he was on like a really, really reduced timetable. And I was literally having him at home the rest of the day. So I really had to really restructure my business. Obviously, I couldn't have any one-to-one clients. I had to like cancel launches. But I figured out by the time he left that school and obviously started a new school, and now he's in full-time school. But during that upheaval period, I spoke to so many parents actually who run their own business that are in this situation, because so many of us with neurodivergent children end up running our own business. But and figured out ways to restructure my business in small ways. So, I learned that not everything has to have a massive launch. Like I just did some one-off masterclasses where I just did an hour Zoom where I taught people through their story. It was like 20 something pound a ticket. And, I sold quite a few of those, and I just found small like daily habits that I could build in, because I couldn't commit to big programs or even in-person events or anything like that. And so it really gave me that mindset that, when I'm looking at my business now and I'm thinking, okay, like I want to bring more revenue in or I want to offer something different, it doesn't have to be a big thing that takes months to plan, because sometimes that would put me off, like, oh, I don't want to do this, don't want to do that. Sometimes you can just put something out there and be like, hi, I'm doing this next week. If you want to come, here's the link. And that was actually really liberating, because it just gave me a different approach to business than feeling like, of course, those big launches work and I still do them, but actually that I could experiment and try different things along the way and do it in a small way rather than all or nothing.
Yeah. That's given you the freedom and the flexibility that you need, that you can carry on now for the rest of your business,
Yeah.
can't you? And I think that's a great message, actually. It doesn't always have to be massive, absolutely exhausting launches. It can be smaller things and ways to test new material or test what your audience want, I suppose.
Yeah.
So, with you and with the PR and media, now you've already mentioned that media covers a lot of things. Most people, when you say the term press and media, would think either printed newspapers, maybe magazines, or TV shows. But actually, there's like so much that's in that umbrella, isn't there?
Yeah. So as well as those things, obviously you've got like the newer forms like podcasts and things like that. A lot of now publications are also using social media. So sometimes it might be actually doing an Instagram live with a publication, or of course, lots of publications now have their own podcast. So
Mm.
supporting, like for example, one of my clients this week filmed some YouTube content for a big health publication. So the multimedia side of things, it doesn't have to just be like independent things. A lot of the big publications are also looking for like experts and contents and things like that. Of course, you've also got like the in-person events, and a lot of magazines are doing these things as well now, like Stylist Live, for example. You've got things like speaking gigs, you've got things like brand ambassadors. Some of my clients then work with other brands and sort of promote them and do the PR as an expert for them. Yeah, you've got so many different things. You've got things like collaborating with other brands, you've got things like giveaways. So it doesn't have to be just the newspapers and magazines. It can be all these things really, that come under the PR umbrella, especially as publications now are working. Another one is awards. Like a lot of magazines and newspapers have their own awards, for example. So there are multiple different ways really to work with publications now. It doesn't have to just be writing an article for the media.
Yeah. Times have moved on.
Yes, definitely.
I love that. Um, what would be like the three biggest red flags that you would recommend your clients to look out for? So, if there was an opportunity that had come up to them, because I've seen some real horror stories that
Yeah.
people have got themselves in situations. So, what would be the three biggest red flags that you would be like, I would sort of recommend walking away from that?
Okay. Well, the first one, I mean, I would just make sure if they've come to you directly, that the opportunity is legit, because there's a lot of places now that will reach out to you that say, we'd love to you to write this, and then there's like an admin fee, or like it's really just a way of getting
Yeah.
advertising. So if something lands in your inbox, and a lot of the newspapers will do this as well. Like we've just got a slot that's just come up, like it's usually completely fully booked, but this space has just come available. Shall we send you some information? And then the information is it's like advertising. So if a publication reaches out of the blue, and isn't if someone reaches out saying like, I'm working on this specific article, I need 500 words, that would be usually fine. But if they reach out of the blue and say like, can we just feature you without any sort of specifics? Or if there's like a last minute opportunity, I think that is always a red flag. You're okay to say, can I get more information? But just be aware that a lot of the time that can be like a trick of like advertorial.
Yeah.
A second red flag really, I think, is if the journalist is sort of just vague about the direction, of the article. So, like maybe they'll say like they want some quotes for ADHD, but it's okay to say like, okay, what's the bigger focus of this? Like, is this like a expert article? Are you looking for case studies? So, most of the time when journalists reach out to me, they'll be like, this is what I'm working on. This is what it's going to look like. This is what the title's going to be. So if you've got a lack of that information, then that can be really like a bit of a worry as well. So just be aware of that. And I think the third red flag is, I wouldn't say not offering a read back is always a red flag, because, like, for example, I've had people say before, like, if you've sent out a product for review, can I have a read back of that? And I would say no, like, their words on your product is their words. Like, as long
Yeah.
as the
Yeah.
stockist link is correct and like the product name is correct, we can't control, if you just think of like TV reviews or like film reviews, we can't control what those are. So you have to bear that in mind. And the same with the expert content. Like I've had that people say that to me before, and it's literally like 100 words on water. Like, what do you think I'm going to be able to do to make you look bad? Like, so I wouldn't say that like that's always a red flag, but if you are working on something that is a real life story that is, emotional, it's upsetting for you to retell, it maybe has your children involved or you're naming people and all of those sorts of things, and the journalist isn't able to give you a read back, then I would definitely think, okay, why not? Because when it's something personal like that, a journalist will usually absolutely say, okay. So if they say no, then you have to think about why would they be saying no in this situation?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's talk about money now, because I
Okay.
know a lot of people think you get paid a lot of money to like have your story printed in
Okay,
a
yeah.
magazine. Is that true? And is it realistic?
I think it is and it isn't. Like, the people that will pay you for your story are usually one or two things. The one is like a real life story, and it tends to be the women's weekly type mags, like your chat, you pick me up. They usually have a budget for the real life stories. And the real life stories are going to need to be quite dramatic. It's not going to be like, I just left my job and now I'm a yoga teacher. That's something that sounds good, but I mean, it's going to be those ones that I think are, dramatic, difficult to live through, and those sorts of things. So that's the one type of thing you might get paid for. The other type of thing you might get paid for is if you write the whole article. So, for example, Metro Platform is a really great place that you can pitch like first person stories. They usually pay you write the whole article about your opinion or your thoughts. Um, I find in general the publications that will pay is when you've got quite a unique perspective, like I keep going back to water because I've got water in front of me, but 5 tips to drink more water is probably not going to get you paid. So as a
Mm,
rule, most PR opportunities that like I share with my clients or I share in my membership are not paid. If you are offered payment, it's usually because you've wrote the whole thing, it's quite a unique perspective, or you've got a unique story. As you get more established, especially if the PR brings you more social media followers as an expert, that can be a really good place to get paid. So, for example, if you're like a menopause expert that I worked with previously, she got paid to be an ambassador for like a big brand and sharing her expertise. So, that can be another way that you get paid when you sort of collaborate with another PR agency who, like, say, if you've got a milk. I don't know. You say if you've got like a dairy free milk and they need a nutritionist to like endorse it and talk about it and those sorts of things. So those are the sort of exceptions. But I would say that I think they're a nice sort of bonus as opposed to a thing that you should aim for, because you should be thinking strategically about how it can make you money in other ways. And that could
yeah,
be by increasing your SEO and Google so people find you online, by, direct sales, by those trust tags and helping buyer decisions. And personally, I think those are going to be more impactful than like a couple of £100 here and there.
yeah. Amazing. And you've just spoken then about like bringing the followers into your and turning yourself into an expert in your field. How do you recommend that you bring that audience into your world? So if you've been in one of the women's weekly magazines, how can you get that to actually transfer into your business and come and find you online?
So this is a bit trickier if it's a print magazine. Obviously, if it's online, we can see people coming from the website. If it's a print publication, it's a bit trickier. I would say the only thing we can do is like when we give the journalist our information, it's to always make sure you get the right credit. So make sure that you link to your website, that you link to your Instagram or whatever else you want to link to, and give that to the journalist to make sure you get those links. Again, there's no guarantees, unfortunately, but we can try and make sure that if we are using our website link, for example, which is what most journalists would use, that then when people click on the link, it's really easy for them to then follow you on Facebook or follow you on Instagram. So you're really like mapping out the customer's journey and thinking about, okay, this journalist is going to mention me. How can I then get them to jump over? But I think one of the mistakes people make is that they focus so much on that part of things, but they don't actually use it in their existing marketing. So
Mm.
actually use the coverage. You could use it to talk about social media content and get more followers that way. People use it in Facebook ads if they've got the right permissions, having it on their website. And when anyone lands on the website, they see those trust tags. So don't just see it as a way that it's going to bring in customers like passively for you. Use it as a tool in your marketing, just like you would anything else, to then get those results, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's an amazing bit of advice there. And so often people don't realize that actually, the, probably one of the biggest benefits is being able to use it in your content, and it's
Yeah.
social proof, isn't it? And I think there's trust by association. If a leading newspaper, magazine, podcast, whatever it is trusting you and the information and advice that you're giving, then just by trust by association, well, you must know what you're talking about because they've printed your words, or they've, and I think that's really the powerful bit, isn't it? It's about
Yeah.
getting the level of awareness and authority in your space.
Yeah, and so many business owners just don't share their content, and I think they're really missing a trick, because I think it's really important to do so and to use it, like you say, as social proof. And those are the sorts of things that sort of help those buying decisions. So it's not always just you're going to get this many followers from this article. It's about every step of your customer journey.
Yeah, definitely. Amazing. Jenna, thank you so much. Where can people find you to come and work with you, or learn more about this scary world of press and PR?
So there's a few different ways. I have my Instagram at Jenna Farmer PR, and then my Facebook group, Get Your Business in the Media with Jenna Farmer. I have a podcast called PR in Your Pocket, and then I will give you a link. I have a freebie that's like a free guide to getting top tier media coverage. So I'll give you a link to that if you can put it
Amazing.
in the show notes.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Thank you so much. One final question for you. Have you ever wanted to walk away from it all and quit?
I honestly haven't, but I think if you've come from a job where you was a teacher before, and then your job is looking at magazines, getting people in the media, it's such a contrast. And like every single person that I've spoken to that's left teaching to run their own business, like every day just feels like such a joy that I can honestly say that I've never ever
Wow.
thought about it. I also, if you have, likely like I am neurodivergent, if you have a brain that just like looking back, I was just not a good fit for traditional employment at all. Like I found
Mm.
office politics so difficult. I found everything's so difficult. So once, even just like a few weeks into being my own boss, even if it wasn't PR, I would be doing something to be my own boss, because I'm just not good in a 9 to 5 situation.
No, I say this all the time. I'm just unemployable now.
I
I,
really am. And it's
I,
so bad that you think about it, like you try and force it for so long. And I
I
used to have
know.
so many misconceptions about myself, like I'm not ambitious or like not particularly career driven. But I really am. I just wasn't in that system that's like, like a leadership scale, or like different interviews for promotion and all of that. And since I've actually run my own business, I realized that none of the things I thought was true. It was just that I was not fit for that system at
Oh,
all.
honestly, Jenna, that is so relatable. And I don't think I've ever really realized that. But the amount of labels and negative things, stories that
Yeah.
I was telling myself when I was employed, and actually none of it was true. It was just the oppression of being in the corporate world. Like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah. Well, we've broken free. And I love the fact that you said every day is such a joy. Like, that is so beautiful. So, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting away with you. I will include that link to that freebie. That sounds absolutely fantastic. I will put that in the show notes for everybody, along with your social links. And thank you to the listeners. As always, I hope you found it useful. There's loads of golden nuggets in there. Get yourself seen in the press, start reaching out to people, and I will speak to you all next week. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you are ready to make your life simpler, then don't forget to check out today's sponsor, Xero, the accounting software that is ready to supercharge your business by automating routine tasks, giving you quick access to your financial data, and helping you get paid up to twice as fast using their online invoice payments. So if you are ready for a simpler way to keep on top of your bookkeeping, go check out Xero today. Get their special offer using the link in the show notes below.